Good day, everybody. I'm Naived Merchant. I head Fujitsu's SAP practice for Oceania, and I'm here today with Jon. Jon.
Thanks, Naived. I'm Jon Wilson. I'm part of the SAP's Global Domain Advisory team for supply chain management, and that means I have the privilege of working with some of our biggest, our fastest growing, and our most innovative customers here in Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you, Jon. Jon and I are today going to talk about supply chain management, something extremely topical, extremely important, and crucial for this market. We're going to talk about what are the trends, we're going to talk about what are the complexities, and what can organizations do to better equip themselves to handle this complex challenge. Jon, to begin with, given how complex supply chains are, what do you think are the key trends that are shaping the supply chain market today?
Yeah, there's no doubt that, global supply chains are incredibly complex. And, when we think about, what supply chain leaders' key objectives are, obviously, I've got to achieve customer service levels, I've got to maintain agility and resiliency within my business. But I've also got to do that whilst managing productivity and efficiency. And if we look at, some of the global trends, the global impacts that we're seeing around supply chain, we're seeing things like global conflicts, we're seeing trade disruptions, we're seeing logistics disruptions, we're seeing many different factors that are impacting on supply chain leaders' abilities to meet those objectives. And some of those are kind of global in nature, but then there's also local things like finding the right skills, bringing new people into the workforce, and being able to skill them appropriately and then keep them within the supply chain industry. And and then we're seeing technology changes, the emergence of AI and other technologies that are shifting the landscape in terms of what we need to focus on from a supply chain perspective.
Absolutely, Jon. I think if we quickly reflect on current events, and we'll keep COVID out of the conversation because it's reflective of a near past, but if we look at current events, if we look at what's happening around globally with tariffs that are coming in, the tariff wars that are now being fueled by global economies and domestic resilience, we're talking about a complex environment that's evolving and emerging, where enterprises are being challenged around their economic stability and their ability to compete in the market. And supply chain is at the center of it all. And what you've said about these challenges, be it regulatory, be it around supply, around talent, around agility, all of these play a central role in ensuring that supply chains are evolving and optimized for organizations, because that is how organizations will succeed and thrive.
And I think one of the challenges is when presented with with a lot of these external factors, many supply chain leaders they're looking internally at their readiness to respond. You mentioned agility. And they're looking at their internal systems, and they're seeing, hey, we've got multiple systems that are maybe disconnected. We've got a lot of manual steps that we have to do. We have silos of data. It's very difficult to get an accurate picture of the overall business. And even when we do get that picture, it's often out of date. And so getting an up-to-date and real-time view of this is incredibly difficult. So I think for a lot of supply chain leaders who are trying to be more agile and trying to be more responsive, are finding actually there's a lot of internal challenges in actually being able to do that. And this is limiting, I guess, their ability to achieve some of those objectives that we outlined at the start.
Absolutely. I think that leads us to the next thought bubble around, well, supply chains are complicated, challenging. But how is supply chain management being redefined for industries that have a very complex environment? What's different from regular organizations or enterprises versus those that are hyper complex and need something different?
Yeah, I think what we've seen over, I guess decades, is there was historically a real focus on efficiency. Supply chain was seen, we need to keep our costs down if we want to be efficient. We saw, people looking globally at, where are the best places to manufacture, where are the best places to ship from, and we optimized our supply chain for that efficiency. And, we got very lean and got very good at this. Then, of course, in a world where disruptions are coming more frequently and the scale and impact of those disruptions is greater, we're seeing a bit of a shift now from just pure efficiency to how do I become more agile? How do I become more resilient? How do I manage risk within my supply chain and within my organization so that I can respond to those disruptions? Not just respond, but also maybe take advantage of some of the opportunities that those disruptions might present as well, right? To get into new business models or to disrupt some of my competitors. And so we've seen that over recent years, that there's been a real focus on that agility, that responsiveness, and that risk. But we're seeing things going now is kind of that next stage where what I want to do is actually move beyond that to a more autonomous supply chain. So, rather than having to run a scenario and understand all the different options, what I want now out of my supply chain is to get visibility across the end-to-end supply chain. So when something occurs, a response can be formulated and implemented automatically. And really, I guess this is part of the promise of AI, right? Is that, less manual intervention and more autonomous management of my supply chain, where I'm orchestrating all of those different parts. And I have visibility not just of my own operations and my own supply chain, but actually I have connections into all of my partners, my customers, my suppliers, the complete network. So I can actually then start to orchestrate the end-to-end process.
Jon, that is phenomenal, because I think we've just coined something here. Organizations want to move away from just operating internally to orchestrating across their entire supply chains. And I think that is critical for success and critical to thrive in today's business. Jon, what strategies do you think businesses can adopt to build more resilient supply chains?
Yeah, look, I think, it really comes down to understanding, those core processes, right? Understanding and having, integrated end-to-end processes internally. But I think one of the key strategies today is to extend those processes beyond your own organizational boundaries. You need to look at how you collaborate with others, how you collaborate with your customers, how you collaborate with your suppliers, how you collaborate with your service providers who support you. And we're really seeing, this concept of a network, right? And in supply chain, we always talk about networks, but the concept of a technical network that is actually supporting that collaboration. So in SAP, we have the SAP Business Network, which is the largest collaboration network globally, and it supports a lot of commerce automation. So POs and invoices and shipping notices, but actually can go a lot further than that in terms of supporting things like quality checks or being able to understand inventory that is held outside of your own warehouses, or planning collaboration where I take that demand plan and I share it with my suppliers and understand whether they are able to support the forecasts that I'm making. So we're seeing the concept of a network and a concept of collaboration as really being crucial in terms of being able to prepare and get visibility across everything that is happening in your supply chain. And that extends also into areas like logistics, so being able to track and trace all of my shipments, understand are they on time, if they're going to be early or if they're going to be late, and what that means then in terms of my operations. Same thing for asset management, being able to exchange information with manufacturers, with service providers around assets and around work that needs to be done. So there really is a tremendous amount we can do in terms of building resiliency by first building visibility across our entire supply chain network. And I think in terms of preparing and being able to respond, that visibility and that resiliency is key.
Jon, I think the example that jumps out in my mind is about what we're doing at Botanical Waters, which is an organization that has a vision of being able to provide clean, ethically sourced water to its market. And they are themselves looking at the track and trace component of supply chain management. And where Fujitsu is supporting them is through their ability to track source and provenance of water, whether that water has come from the right source that it claims to be from, and whether that water has been harvested correctly to be able to sustain further realization of that supply chain. And that becomes really important for them, and that's their promise to their customers, that their product has been ethically sourced, can be traced back to its provenance, and can be certified for what it claims to be. And I think that is equally important in today's world, where everybody has eyes on how well are organizations managing this entire source to consumption.
And another great example here locally, actually, with Transport for New South Wales, and it's in a different domain, in the asset management domain, because Transport are responsible for all of the transportation assets. Trains, buses, ferries, but also roads, bridges across the entire state. But they actually don't operate most of those transportation assets, right? They have around 700 operators that work with Transport for New South Wales to deliver all of those operations. And what they found is actually they didn't have visibility across all of those assets. Even just a consolidated asset register was difficult. So when they needed to answer questions about those transportation assets, they would have to ask 700 individual questions and then consolidate back the answers. And so they used this concept of the business network and of a consolidated asset register to create what they call the Transport Asset Custodian Platform, TACP, where they are able to bring data from all of those operators into a single platform that everyone then has visibility, and then they can actually use not just for understanding the state's transportation assets, but then also for planning and for building visibility for the future. So a really great example of local organizations, who are using the network to be able to work with different stakeholders to achieve a platform for the future.
Perfect, Jon. So what does the future of supply chain look like, and how can companies better brace and prepare for it?
Yeah, look, I think, there's so much that is possible today that I think many organizations haven't really started to scratch the surface of. I mean, if we look at an area like demand planning, right, we can already, run multiple scenarios, bring in demand plans, collaborate with our suppliers around that. But I think the areas that we're seeing, for the future are areas like bringing in external risk, and so, at SAP, we've partnered with Everstream Analytics, so you can bring risk data into your plans or into your logistics or into your transportation and get visibility of that risk profile alongside the other data you're planning. And so, there's these capabilities. I mean, this is not the future. This is now, right? These are things that you can do right now. But I think in the future, what we're going to see is the ability to, allow those scenarios and those plans to be executed automatically, right? It goes back to that idea of the autonomous or orchestrated supply chain, so that rather than someone having to do the analytics, recognize the problem, evaluate the possible options, and then pick one and then implement it. What we want is systems that are actually able to execute a lot of those steps without intervention. And we're seeing that, in many narrow use cases today, where we're able to automate, many different processes. When something goes wrong, we can automate a response. But the use cases today are generally quite narrow. I think in the future, what we're going to see is we're going to see those use cases widen. We're going to see the concept, we talked a little bit about AI, but the concept of agents, that are actually monitoring what's going on, and when they recognize a problem, working together as a collective. So a finance agent that recognizes, hey, we're going over budget, talks to the logistics agent to understand, hey, what are the different options here, maybe in terms of my shipment, and then that agent then makes a recommendation or maybe even executes that change. And so that really, I think is a tremendously exciting sort of future, where we see systems not just responding to our input and giving us data for decision making, but actually able to drive and manage a lot of those decisions by themselves.
I think the future is now, Jon. And from a supply chain perspective, I think organizations need to embrace the fact that they're here today. They've got the opportunity to accelerate their own innovation in supply chain management. They're able to optimize it and transform it. And they are able to make use of all of these use cases that we've discussed through the different offerings that SAP has and that Fujitsu can help them with.
I think that's the key, right? Is understanding, actually, in a lot of cases, what the power is of the technology you already have, right? And I see this regularly with many of our customers, that that they don't necessarily understand the full power of the platforms that they already have in place. And so I'd certainly encourage them, if they're interested in this space, and reach out to SAP, of course, but also reach out to partners like Fujitsu to really understand what is possible, because it's amazing how much has changed even just in the last few years, and how much more is possible in these platforms than maybe people realize.
Fantastic, Jon. I think it's been an enlightening conversation with you, and I'm hoping that our viewers can also consider where they are going on their supply chain journey and reach out to us if they want to have a conversation around how to take it to the next level. Thank you so much for joining us, and I am glad to be your host today, Jon.
Thank you so much for having me.